It is outrageous that casinos alone are holding up the entire state budget.
For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan, Capitol Bureau Chief and host of Under the Dome, and you're listening to our podcast for the week of September 18th, 2023. I'm joined today by my colleagues Avi Bajpai and Kyle Ingram. At the start of the podcast, you heard the voice of Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, who was griping about the holdup on the budget over, and I don't think anyone had this on their bingo cards, casinos. So it's all about money, obviously, but gambling this time. And this week was a doozy for a lot of different reasons, and not just for what's in the budget, since we basically don't know any of that yet, but how things have been working between the two chambers. And none of us, I don't think, have been covering the legislature since Republicans had the supermajority before, when Cooper was first in office, just when they had a regular majority. And now that they have the supermajority, the dynamics are different because they have total control. So it's House versus Senate. And we saw a really clear look at that this week between the way Berger and Moore interacted, and really just the two of them more than the chambers, I would say. Well, maybe the Freedom Caucus and Berger, right?
Yeah, definitely on full display, especially with Leader Berger, basically no holds barred, not mincing his words, and making it clear to reporters, making it clear to everyone at the building that they have total control, but there's a lot of different priorities for the different chambers, and different ways that it kind of falls and plays out ideologically too in the caucus. So very interesting to see this week kind of internal infighting among Republicans.
And we started, usually Monday's a pretty quiet day at the Ledge, and it wasn't this week. We had a bonus Under the Dome newsletter that Kyle wrote, because Monday usually isn't a lot of action going on there. And then Tuesday was the wild day. I guess it was Tuesday this past week. So we're going to hear exactly why all of this drama came to a head on Tuesday, because people thought the budget was coming. And here's what House Speaker Tim Moore told us about the budget with casino and VLTs, what the chances were of that coming up for a vote this week. Here's what Moore said.
While the majority of the caucus supported having gaming as a part of the budget, there are not enough votes to pass a budget that includes gaming from the House.
So what does that mean for the budget?
Well, it means at this point, the only way the House can pass a budget is if it does not include gaming in it.
So Moore said he just didn't have the votes.
Yep. Sometimes it's as simple as that, basically.
But it's a numbers game. There's a variety of math there, right? As far as how many votes he said he needed or wanted versus how many votes there were and how many votes Berger thought there were. Yeah. So what was the actual count? We heard 30, we heard 40.
Yeah, we heard Moore coming out and saying that 30 House Republicans had basically, they met the week before last. They had a lengthy caucus meeting. Then they had a lengthy caucus meeting.
It's House Republicans.
House Republicans this past Monday. I think the estimate we heard was 4+ hours or something like that. So long into the night on Monday. Even after all of that, they ended up at this point where 30 House Republicans, according to Moore, said they're not going to budge. If casinos are in the budget, they're not going to support it. That's a big problem for Republicans because they need 61 votes to pass legislation, to pass a budget. If they only have 40, or 42 rather, that leaves at least 19 votes they need. And getting support from 19 Democrats is a fairly tall order.
Well, they didn't even ask, right? So we saw House Democratic leader Robert Rees after the session. And then by the end of the day, the House just went home. Yeah. I put that in the headline.
Yeah.
But before we get to how the wrap up of the day, really what this came down to, it's about casinos, but it's not just about casinos, because it really is a relationship between Berger and Moore. And here's what Berger told reporters. So take a listen to what he said.
At this point, it's not the casinos. It is whether or not I can go back to my members and tell them that I have an understanding with the leadership in the House on a particular issue. It doesn't matter what the issue is. When I cannot do that, then it makes it very, very difficult for us to get any kind of business done.
So hearing Berger talk, he's talking in a normal voice, but he was clearly angry.
Yeah.
And it's kind of one of those things where the press corps, we see them all the time. You have a read on how lawmakers talk about each other, the tone they use, and Speaker Moore is never going to say Senator Berger is something negative, and Berger's never going to say directly Speaker Moore. They'll use the leadership or something like that, and they're just mean one person.
Yeah.
They never call them by their names, really. But what we all understood from talking to Berger so much, and how he talks about everything, that he was really not happy.
No.
And he said, as you all just heard, that it's larger than just casinos.
I mean, he's basically saying there that, they've been working on this proposal to legalize some new casinos, non-tribal casinos, for this whole entire summer, basically, since at least June that we know of. These discussions have been happening. What he's basically saying there is that they sort of have, Berger and Moore, according to him, basically had an understanding that if this contentious issue, if this could get a support of a majority of the caucus, which is at least 36 House Republicans, then that's the benchmark, that's the threshold, that's what they're looking for. Once you get that, then you can move forward. And that's basically Berger telling reporters. He said that on Monday and on Tuesday, so he reiterated it on Tuesday, that he kind of felt like, he was saying it himself, the goalposts had moved.
Right, and you do, it is shifting for what kind of support you want on this. And I think that part of the reason maybe Berger was unhappy is that casino, and he was, earlier in the summer, was like, this is not the holdup for the budget. But it is. It wasn't maybe at the time that he said that. So the big things, of course, are the things that always divide the House and Senate: raises and tax cuts. They both want to give raises. The Senate doesn't usually want to give very good raises. The House wants to give better raises, sometimes about the same that the Democrats want for raises. The Senate wants faster tax cuts. The House is like, yeah, we like tax cuts too, all Republicans, but not at that level. So once they finally sorted that out, I feel like, casinos was probably part of a backroom conversation the whole time. Basically, once sports betting passed, they're like, well, since we're talking about gambling, let's look at some more gambling. Yeah. And then it ended up being this final thing. There was one thing, maybe a month ago, where Moore's like, oh, we're almost done. There's only 100 things left, or something like that. Well, now it's really just one. And Moore said that repeatedly, just one. So anyway, at the end of the day, as people know, the House was like, all right, we're going home. So they called each other's bluffs, essentially. The Senate's like, we'll run the budget right now. Let's take the votes with gaming. And the House is like, we'll run the budget right now. Let's take the votes without gaming. And then they took their ball and went home.
I think Moore was telling reporters this past week, after this whole tensions flared, that it was sort of like a pressure cooker in the building. So I think it's one of those situations. He's kind of openly saying that tensions build up. You kind of have different meetings going on. You have the House caucus meeting separately, trying to figure out where the level of support is for them. Then you have reporters rushing over to talk to Berger, then more back and forth. And he kind of basically said, we all just need to take a deep breath, go back, reevaluate, push this down to next week.
So let's also take a deep breath and come back. And after the break, we'll talk about what things were like after that. Some of that pressure cooker steam was released, and Kyle, you were there like the following day, and I was there the day after that, and how things changed a bit with what they were talking about, and then also what they said about gun violence at UNC and what potential solutions are, and our picks for headline of the week. So we'll be right back. You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm Capitol Bureau Chief Don Vaughan, here with my colleagues Kyle Ingram and Abhi Bajpai. For the break, we were talking about the drama, the tension between Senate Leader Phil Berger and House Speaker Tim Moore when they called each other's bluff and I was going to say they went home, but Berger and Moore didn't go home because they were around the next day, and you saw them the next day. So how did the vibe change in the building?
They came back Wednesday, and things were definitely cooled down a little bit, but it was clear that there wasn't any room for anything to get done between the two chambers. Moore said that they needed some time to just cool tensions and like retreat back to their ranks and get everything together. But by the time we spoke at the House session on Wednesday, Moore still hadn't met with Berger, but they were planning on trying to get together and smooth things out. But I mean, it could be, according to him, a week, 2 weeks until we actually get a resolution on this. And starting to feel like that George W. Bush quote, fool me once, can't fool me again. We keep expecting this to come, but we just keep getting the football pulled out from us.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
I feel like that George W. quote is like so good. And even the bumbling of it that he did is just makes it that much more. It's great. Yeah. So by Thursday, everybody knew that they had, had this meeting, and I saw both of them and asked separately. And
that's a good sign that things are improving a little bit, that they're saying that they're meeting at least,
Yeah. So I'm trying to think what Moore said, basically no movement. And Berger said
we asked him on Tuesday. I think we had heard that they were supposed to meet, and we asked Moore in like our second or third gaggle.
Oh yeah, he's like, I left him a message. Yeah, so they definitely did not meet at all, and had no plans to meet. But finally they did, because what else are they going to do? They're the leader of the House and Senate and their party. Like, you're going to have to sort it out. Even if you don't like each other that particular day or the next day or yesterday or whatever else. And I've noticed both of them, again, what I was saying at the beginning, that they're very careful not to criticize each other specifically, which is kind of that unwritten rule of politics that you don't always criticize people in your own party, except for obviously like the never Trumpers and that sort of thing, or if someone does something particularly egregious.
If you're trying to have a productive outcome, then makes sense.
And they also, Moore will not criticize his own chamber either, and we don't really know how he feels about the fact that they can't get gambling to go in there, but he refuses to impugn any of his members for not getting on the same board with everyone to pass gambling. And he told us, I'm not going to try to intimidate people in this caucus and want everyone to vote their conscience. So
that was right. And that he said, even though he supports it, he just doesn't have the votes. But the intimidation thing pretty much seemed like he was saying that's what the Senate does. And then, I don't remember which reporter asked him, so are you saying that the Senate does this? And he's like, oh, I didn't say it. What are you talking about? No, we're all best friends. So Berger said their meeting was productive, and I tried to get a little bit more out of him, like, well, how and what way? And was this a touch base meeting? And where are we? And he's like, it was productive. Right, and that's really, the fact that they sat down in the room together is a lot of movement. So as you all are listening to this at the start of the week, or whichever day you listen to the podcast or watch the podcast, they probably met again. Is there any movement? It doesn't, again, it's the legislature, so they're always full of surprises. Meanwhile, the Democrats are like, oh, hello, it's us. Like, we also represent half the state. What's going on? And so I'd mentioned Reeves earlier. Reeves and the Senate Democratic leader, Dan Blue, had a press conference with a couple other Democrats where they're basically like, we haven't been involved in this process at all. We're not happy about it. Reeves called it a monarchy, saying that Moore and Berger are these kings making decisions. And Blue's like, a monarchy? There's like, not all monarchies are bad. And he said it's more like autocracy. And then I asked Berger later what he thought about that. And Berger pointed out that, Blue has been in power for a long time. And he was House Speaker at one point, and things were a little different with who's in charge. So I think, I don't remember Berger's exact words, but it was the equivalent of like, well, he should know, because he's done this, the same kind of thing when parties are in power. So the other thing we need to talk about that happened this week is there was another lockdown on the UNC campus because of gun violence. Nobody was shot or anything, but it was on campus, so the sirens and all the students being scared and the faculty and staff and all of this response, but it was also another example of workplace violence, like the physics professor who was who was killed, and this was someone, wielding a gun at working
shop.
in the bagel shop on campus, another workplace violence. So,
and just one day after, several students from UNC and some other places, A&T as well, were at the legislature rallying with some Democrats for some of these gun safety laws, some of these gun safety measures, red flag laws.
March for Our Lives, and David Hogg, who does this a lot, that was the day that they planned to come, which they weren't talking about guns that day or legislation, but that worked out when March for Our Lives wanted to come to the building. Everybody has like these kind of lobbying days and advocacy days where you come try to talk to lawmakers, and that's a lot of what they did, even if, Republican lawmakers anyway, weren't really interested in.
Aren't really an audience for that yet.
And something we've seen a few times this session is they packed the gallery, and during the middle of House business, they started chanting, "Vote them out, vote them out."
Right.
And the speaker, Tim Moore, responded saying something to the effect of, "Well, they must secretly be Duke students." He said he was trying to relieve the tension, but came under a lot of criticism on social media for that comment, given that they were there to protest after the death of a faculty member at their university. So.
Right. I think that, reporters asked more about this, and he is trying to, diffuse the tension in the room. And I mean, the thing is, if you come into the House or Senate chamber, you can't, as soon as you start yelling from the gallery, you're going to get escorted out. That's, violates the rules of the building, and it is kind of Mort's personality to make some sort of quip about something.
He makes a quip every single time someone disrupts the.
Yeah, it was because he was introducing the UNC students, I think, right?
Exactly. Right as he was telling lawmakers, right as they were convening, that there was a group of UNC students, the chants broke out. I mean, that's what they were there to do. Signaled their displeasure and protest, but
they wanted the attention, media attention, of course, and lawmakers' attention. That's the whole point. Protests. Yeah. So because of that, the attention on the
attention he got for how he sort of responded to that, and then this incident happening the very next day. Obviously, lots of talk about UNC in the news, about this incident, about just generally this conversation always comes back up about safety. What do you do? How do you respond? What is the appropriate, what should be on the table for lawmakers? Should they, that question always gets posed.
Right.
And Moore was talking about that.
Right. Because a lot of people, the initial reaction is there must be laws that can solve this. And Berger and Moore had very different reactions. And Berger, when reporters asked him about it, it was that he understands that people want to do something. And he said, what specific law in this case? And these were incidences that weren't mass shootings with assault-style weapons and that sort of thing, which, like the laws can get involved. It was handguns, and it was like not regular, but a crime of...
more of like a personal conflict, perhaps, in the first case.
So they were like, they already broke all these laws, and... Moore went a little further, where he said, he has one of the sons works at the Ledge, I think, or finished law school and does, and the other one goes to UNC, and he said this is personal. But Moore went down on kind of a typical Republican talking point of the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, and questioned that, the gun-free zone idea, and if more people were armed. And he mentioned, other crime that happens in downtown Raleigh, and there's no sirens involved. And
which the gun safety advocates, Democrats, are kind of like flabbergasted by. They just, this is another indication that on this issue, like many other issues, there's just too much daylight between Republicans and Democrats. It's really a matter of who, just comes down to basically who's in charge, who's in power.
Well, I think Moore is more of the extreme, or I mean, not extreme, but the Republican of gun. And Berger was a little more tempered, saying that people understand, and then what are the specific proposals and that sort of thing. But we're almost out of time, so let's get to our picks for headliner of the week. Avi, why don't you go first, since yours is kind of related to what we've been talking about?
Yeah. So this was this past week was a big week for conservatives in Raleigh and on Capitol Hill and in D.C. You had a lot of pressure. I was basically thinking it's kind of like Speaker Tim Moore coming under some pressure from Republicans on basically what to do with the casino business, and then you have Speaker McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, coming under pressure, intense pressure from a flank of his party about opening up an impeachment inquiry, investigating President Biden, and it's just an interesting comparison, interesting sort of point about how just because you get the votes, you get into power. The House Republicans in D.C. secure a majority, and they take power. And then over here, you have House Republicans get a supermajority. That doesn't always mean that it's smooth sailing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kyle, what's your headliner of the week?
Well, many people may not have noticed, but there were actually elections this week in Charlotte and Sanford. It was a primary for local races. And what was notable is incredibly low voter turnout. It was less than 5% in Charlotte. And then in Sanford, I believe there were less than 200 overall votes. So I was kind of interested in these races to see them as sort of a first test of the new voter ID requirement, because it was in place for this. But it's really hard to draw any conclusions at all because so few people voted. We did see around, I think, 100 provisional ballots cast in Mecklenburg County, which could be a result of people not being able to bring an ID. But again, it's just so hard to draw conclusions when nobody showed up.
I've covered municipal elections for a long time, and those who have worked in local government or covered local government know that local turnout in elections is very low.
Sort of a chronic problem.
Well, local elections actually affect your daily lives a lot more than federal and state. Although we of course love state government here on the podcast. All right, my headliner is Earth, Wind, and Fire, and the 21st night of September, which is coming up at the end of this week. And maybe the budget deal is just waiting for me to write the lead on that story about how here we are, or that it's already passed. So. Shout out to Earth, Wind, and Fire, and I hope everybody plays that on Friday. So, all right. For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan, here with Kyle Ingram and Bajpai. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.